Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be, and welcome to a post about what the internet is doing to all of us. I mean, we all know it's makes things a bit strange compared to the way they were, say, 30 years ago, but there are some tricks, I think, that can help you look at yourself in a new way through the eyes of the internet. This post is called Pygmalion or Self-Actualization. When we create an idealized or demonized image of ourselves or of the opposite sex, we may change how the object of our attention acts or looks, thereby bringing to life the image we have created. As when a young woman gets plastic surgery to look more like a Snapchat image filtered picture, or when a woman lashes out after being antagonized over a long period of time. This makes me wonder if when I create a flawed protagonist and in my novel, and I give her an anti-hero boyfriend, do I help readers become more kind to themselves by lowering their expectations of themselves? Or do I create more flaws in the readers by making a bad example? As in all things, I'm sure there is a golden mean. We don't want people lashing out at their neighbors because of how ashamed they feel over not measuring up to some impossible standard. And we don't want people giving up and failing to strive to meet any standard at all. What may be medicine for one person may be poison for another, and I wonder how the dosage changes depending on a person's gender. In the end, I conclude that it is important to keep the discussion going so that ugly truths do not end up festering in our blind spots and causing us to behave in unexpected, distorted, destructive ways. By keeping discussions about the gray areas going, we prevent a buildup of darkness or distortion in our pictures, of ourselves and others. It is when we do not explore the darkness in our image of the world that cartoonish approximations appear and confuse those who see them. Nowhere is this more apparent than in our artistic representations of the opposite sex. I remember a talented male writer who started his story with a profile of a male character, and as a reader I really felt like I was inside of that character's head. I felt the smoke in his lungs and saw the world laid out before his eyes. I felt his greed and I knew what he cared about. The next chapter profiled the female protagonist, and I felt like I was around her but not inside of her head. I was focusing on her clothes, on her gait, and on the decorations in the room. I only knew that she was nervous about a test she had to take, but I had no sense of her worldview. Pages and pages later, she was still blank. We were still seeing her from the outside. Things were happening to her, and she was responding, but she was not setting plans in motion like the male character was. She was going to be the victim of his plans, and this isn't very nice to read from a woman's perspective. The woman's head was like an empty space in which furniture was provided, but no driving motion. That may be how men see women, but that is not how women see themselves. I mean, some men always qualify. Shakespeare was quite good at writing women, and some believe that a wealthy, well-traveled woman probably contributed to the writing of many of his most famous plays. Shakespeare was merely a provincial glovemaker after all, and the stories depicted an exotic, kingly world to which he wouldn't have had access. The stories are also very insightful in their portrayal of the thoughts of intelligent women. And in the blog post below, you can see a link to a story which investigates the idea that Shakespeare was a collaboration with a wealthy Jewish woman who had lived in Italy and who was a poet. In contrast to this, there is a problem with how most men portray women in their works of art. And I think that, at least in the present day, it is generally destructive of women's self-image. In men's art, there is typically a strong male hero and a weak woman. If there is a strong woman character, she is often a villain. In the post linked below, I have a video there of a clip of 300 Rise of an Empire. It was the sequel to 300, the movie about the Greek soldiers at Thermopylae. And while this movie was celebrated as for depicting women as leaders, on the whole, the image was of a woman as villain, manipulative, vindictive, and using her sexuality to create her own demonic Pygmalion and ensnare virtuous male leaders, who were portrayed in an unambiguously positive light. So while it was marketed as a feminist movie, or a movie in which women were leaders, it had a very negative portrayal of women in it. It was advertised as a feminist movie, but it was more of a cautionary tale about female vengeance and the need to contain it. I mean, talk about giving young men a distorted image of women. It used to be that, a guy would grow up and he would get his understanding of what women were based on watching his mother. But now we have this entertainment apparatus that is feeding men these very charged, distorted pictures of what women are. If I look back in history, I see a precedent for this, but the modern day has somehow exaggerated it. In most famous literature written by men, if there is a female central character, the point of the book is often to entertain us with her bumbling failures or victimization. Just think of Zola's Nana, Anna Karenina, Madame Bovary, Moll Flanders, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Tony Buddenbrooks, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. If I compare this to art made by women, the female characters are not always bumbling, weak, or defined by their victimhood. They are more often triumphing dignity, identity, and character intact, despite adversity. I think of George Eliot, the Brontes, Jane Austen, and Virginia Woolf, and that they give us many examples of this character arc. Tolstoy was apparently inspired by George Eliot's Middlemarch. George Eliot was a woman, of course, to write a similar story in Anna Karenina. But instead of giving the central woman character dignity and strength, as Eliot did, he turned her into a weak, frivolous adulteress. And this is a pattern you see a lot when you compare literature written by men and women. Similarly, Lisbeth Salander in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Tess of the D'Urbervilles, the woman who was raped by a nobleman, they are, in their worlds, they're kind of freaks, forever changed by their ordeal. And I'm not sure that a woman would have written their stories in the same way, because I think she would have looked away from the ugliest parts of their victimization in order to preserve their dignity. A woman author of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo might have shown a continuous thread of identity which was not broken by victimization. Then again, such an author might not have caught as many readers because she wouldn't have been brave enough and detached enough to show the most prurient aspects of abuse. In this vein, if we imagine a white author writing about the abuse of black slaves, I doubt it would be seen as something that benefits black identity. It would be seen as prurient entertainment at the expense of the other. I should balance this perspective with a description of a woman character who was written perfectly by a man, but I didn't major in literature and I haven't paid enough attention to come up with one, so I'm sorry for that. I think there is certainly room for the sort of work from a man that says, "This is how I see you," because we need to keep the conversation going. But there also needs to be an equal amount of work from women that says, "Hey, this is how I see you." But as we all know, these conversations are rather tricky. I am trying to write novels featuring women scientists, and I find that I am unwittingly following all of these patterns. My male characters are often placeholders or fools corrupted by the simplicity of the choices afforded by their power, and my women characters are sometimes wise, sometimes foolish, sometimes weak, and sometimes arrogant. I've given the women dimension and dignity, while the men lack this. And I find that maybe I consciously did this because I know it's the reverse of what a lot of male authors do. I know I'll have to work harder to move away from this tendency to fit into a gendered literary pattern. Many authors try and fail to do this. For example, Dostoevsky made Raskolnikov a very interesting character because he understood his sociopathy on a deep level. But despite his lengthy efforts, his angelically good female character, Sonia, was mind-numbingly boring because he had no idea what went on in her head. And when I look at these books these things I've written, I wonder if I'm making problems better or worse, given the Pygmalion effect, that you can kind of create the change that you write about. The last thing I want to do is contribute to stupid, divisive identity politics. But when what is good or bad is only determined in retrospect or in a larger context, the best one can do is attempt to follow the golden rule on the micro scale and strike as much of a balance as one can. I'm not sure if I've done a very good job of that. Sometimes you do try to create a counterbalance for something you see that is out of balance. Virginia Woolf thought that the greatest literature was a product of a balanced, androgynous mind, and I think I agree with her. It's often a product of a collaboration. James Joyce was too linear, driving towards his point like a horse with blinders on, and Jane Austen was too circular, dancing around the point she wished to make with a series of seemingly pointless pirouettes. If you've ever read those authors, you might appreciate some irony in that statement. But most physicists are too linear, literal, and narrow in their thinking, and Einstein was too circular, associative, lateral, and speculative in his thinking to be able to solve major problems entirely on his own. For this reason, it was very hard for him to initially gain acceptance in the physics community. It took help from his more organized friends for him to gain that acceptance. Scientifically speaking, men have a larger brain volume, while women have more connectivity between hemispheres. Einstein had a smaller than average brain, but higher than usual connectivity between hemispheres. And I use him as an example because so many people respect him. If you have read any of the articles I've written on Einstein, you might not have this respect, but I'm assuming that most people do. Autistics tend to have a mental tree which has too many branches around the central control hub, whereas ADHD thinkers tend to have too few branches around the control hub. Schizophrenics tend to suffer from a thinning of the cortex that leads to extra sensitivity to dopamine and crosstalk between parts of the brain which are not typically in contact. These variations from normal tend to increase memory, analytic capacity, and creativity, but not always at the same time. The key is striking the right balance and in combining the different thinking styles to achieve an optimal result. When we see these different traits in one person, we see a genius. These geniuses are everywhere, working their magic in ways that are sometimes difficult to detect. Some geniuses create things that have no impact, while others try to shape the world according to their vision, the sort of pygmalion effect. I wonder if only true geniuses actively disengage from these shaping activities. I'm not sure. A self-actualized genius can bring his or her vision to life. And when that vision involves another person, boundaries may be crossed that infringe on individual autonomy. It is a tricky dance, a tricky marriage. And when we create an image of ourselves online, that image may act back upon us in ways that make it seem that our shadow self has assumed a life of its own. We call out to the world, and our voice echoes back to us in a distorted form. It is difficult to get used to how these new aspects of life in the digital age are changing us. But most people seem to be adapting well to their relationship with their online creations and online selves. So this meandered a bit, but I think I came back in full circle to where I started. I like a nice mental stretch, and this one might have gone a bit too far, but I hope that it sparked something in you and helped you think about something in a new way. I also hope that it sparked a little bit of interest in what my fiction writing might be like. I have written several novels and I encourage you to take a look at them.